is C.L. Barber, and we're looking at crime and punishment. Today we're going to be looking at law enforcement in Anglo-Saxon times. By this time, blood feuds were gone, most crimes were petty theft, and punishments were to deter and humiliate. Firstly, we'll be looking at the tithing. This was started in the 10th century, and it was where men were responsible for each other's behaviour. Tithings were groups of 10 men aged 12 and over. If one local villager committed a crime, then the other 9 had to catch the criminal or pay the fine. This was a system based on loyalty and on not letting others down, and therefore it was a great way of self-policing. There was also the hue and cry. As there was no police force in England until 1829, this was an alternative. If you saw a crime, you would have to raise the alarm, which was the hue and cry, and all of the people in the town or the village were expected to help catch the culprit. Whatever job you were doing at the time had to be dropped, otherwise the person would face a fine. This was an excellent system for catching criminals, as the villagers was policing themselves. When someone was caught, they would be put on a trial by the local jury, and it was such a good system that we still have it today. If you were accused of a crime, then you would be taken to the local folk moot or 100 court. There, a jury of peers would try you and decide if you were guilty or not. If you had a good standing in the community, oath helpers may be able to swear your innocence. However, if there were lots of eyewitnesses who saw you commit the crime, then this wouldn't help. If a local jury couldn't decide on whether a person was guilty or not, it would then go to a trial by ordeal. The first one was a trial by hot iron, and this was usually taken by women. The accused would pick up a red-hot weight and they would walk 3 paces. They would then have their hand bandaged for 3 days. If after 3 days, when the bandage was taken off, the hand was started to heal, then the person was considered innocent. If, however, the hand had become infected, then the person was seen as guilty. This was a very superstitious way of deciding whether someone was innocent or guilty. Another trial was the trial by hot water, and this was usually taken by men. The accused would pick an object from the boiling water, a pot of boiling water, out, and then they would have their hand bandaged for 3 days. Again, if the hand started to heal, they were innocent, and if the hand hadn't started to heal or had become infected, they were guilty. Again, this was superstitious. Another trial was trial by cold water, and again was usually taken by men. The accused was tied with a knot above the waist, then lowered into water that had been blessed by a priest. If he sank below the water, then he was innocent, as God was accepting him in. If, however, he floated, then it was a sign that God had rejected him, so he would be found guilty. Again, this was superstition. For the church, things were more lenient, so they had the trial by blessed bread. This was usually taken by priests. A priest would pray that the accused would choke on blessed bread if they had lied. The accused then ate the bread, and if they choked, they were guilty. But if they managed to eat the bread without choking, they were innocent. Again, this is another example of superstition. Often, if people knew they were guilty, they would confess before it got to a trial by ordeal, because the trials were so extreme, and the punishments were often not as bad as the trial itself. So, what were the punishments then? 3 of the main punishments in this period were the whirlgild and capital and corporal punishment. This is a brief overview. The whirlgild was if a criminal committed a crime, then they would have to pay compensation to a victim. For example, they might have a small fine for stealing chickens. Capital punishment was a crime that was punishable by death, for example, hanging. And corporal punishment was a harsh punishment to deter criminals. For example, it could be mutilation of a feature or a limb. So, the whirlgild. This is the Anglo-Saxon fine, and it was compensation to the victim. This was worked out and set through the king's laws. For killing a noble, for example, you would have to pay 300 shillings to their family. However, a freeman was not as important, and so therefore the cost would be 100 shillings to their family. For killing a peasant, this would be even lower, and at the lowest rank was the Welshman. Also, if you damaged the different parts of a person's body, you would also have to pay a fine. So, for example, If an eye was destroyed because of a person's actions, they would pay 50 shillings, and if an arm was broken, that would cost 6. There was also corporal and capital punishment. Serious crimes earned the death penalty, and the most serious crimes were treason and betraying your lord. This crime of treason was the worst that you could do, and so you would be hanged because it would show the importance of loyalty to the king and would be a huge deterrent. Anyone reoffending was also punished harshly if they were caught. Corporal punishment for reoffenders included cutting off a hand, an ear or a nose, or putting out the eyes. Again, this was to deter others. So a final consideration is that you might be asked to consider how violent Anglo-Saxon justice was. When you're doing this, you need to think about the judgment. Was it very violent, quite violent, or not very violent? When you make your theme and your judgment, you also need to include precise evidence to support this. For example, you could include capital or corporal punishment and the mutilations. You would then also give the balance. So you would say, on the other hand, and then you would try to include examples of where Anglo-Saxon justice wasn't as violent. For example, you could use the ordeal. Then you would end with an overall judgment concluding whether Anglo-Saxon justice was violent and how far. Thank you very much for listening.